welcome to this session on questionnaire design. You will recall that we have already discussed questionnaire and the different response formats that we have, the open-ended questions and the closed-ended questions, how to word your questions, how to decide the sequencing, how to administer the questionnaire, and what all things to keep in mind while administering the questionnaire. Now let us discuss the scales that we use to measure the responses of the respondent. They are of different types. We'll be discussing them one by one in this particular session. So the first type is called the Itemised rating scale. Have a look at the question. This is an example of how you use Itemised rating scale. The question is, what is your opinion of the healing ability of Dettol antiseptic liquid? Please mark your responses below. The answers are excellent, very good, good, average and poor. So this is an example of Itemised rating scale. The characteristics of this scale include limited number of ordered response categories. Now you can see here that there are only 5 response categories. That is what we mean by saying limited number of response categories. And what do we mean by ordered response categories? They follow a particular sequence from the highest to the lowest, from the lowest to the highest, maybe from the most favorable to the least favorable. So the response categories, they follow a particular pattern. They are placed in an order. For example, in this particular question you can see the first response category is excellent. After that we have got very good, then good and average and then poor. It's not as if we can place these categories randomly. This particular sequence will have to be followed, which means you cannot put poor first and then you straightway jump to excellent and then come back to average, then straight away jump to very good. This is just not possible, because the scale would have ordered response categories. Yes, that does mean that the response categories can be in the opposite direction also. For example, the first category can be poor, then average, then 3 would be good, and then we'll have very good and then excellent. So you can adopt either of the two orders, but you have to put all the categories in proper order, which means you can start with excellent, move from excellent to very good and average to poor. You can also start with poor, first is poor and then average and good and very good and excellent, but you cannot place these response categories randomly. They will have to follow a particular order. So this is what we mean by ordered response categories. Now, one problem with this is that the respondent is forced to pick one of the response categories. So he'll have to pick one of these 5 response categories that have been given. Now think of a respondent who feels that the healing ability of Dettol is a notch above good, but it is not very good. So it is somewhere in between very good and good. He would not be able to mark this response here on this particular scale. He will have to either mark very good or he will have to go for good. This is one problem with the itemized rating scales. And the other type of scale is the graphic rating scale, which makes up for this particular lacuna in the itemized rating scale. How? Let's have a look. Again, the same question is there. What is your opinion? But now you see that basically on the two extremes we have given excellent and poor, while they are linked by a continuous line. So excellent is followed by the line till the other extreme is poor. Now this is a peculiar attribute of the graphic rating scale. Now what do we mean by the point that graphic rating scales are easier to respond to? See, basically graphic rating scales are easier for the respondent to respond to. The reason is very simple. Now his mind is much less taxed because he only have to take care of the two extremes. If he knows that at one extreme is excellent and the other extreme it is poor, he simply have to think of where to mark his response. In the itemized rating scale, he had to basically think of the 5 response categories and then where to mark his response. But here he can respond anywhere, right from excellent till poor, including excellent and poor. He can mark his response anywhere on the line also. So he can mark his response on excellent, on poor, and somewhere between excellent and poor on the line. And that is why it is easier for the respondent to respond to such questions. And since it is easier, it is going to speed up the interview because the respondent will have to spend much less time thinking where to mark his response, because of which the interview will be wrapped up fast. But then there is one problem with the graphic rating scales. We saw that in the itemized rating scale only 5 response categories were possible, while in the graphic rating scale there are infinite, theoretically speaking, infinite number of responses possible. How? The respondent can mark his response anywhere on this continuum which has been shown from excellent to poor, anywhere. He does not need to mark it exactly midway between excellent and poor. He can mark it anywhere, and because of which infinite number of responses are possible. I'll give an example. Suppose he wants to mark it, he feels that the respondent feels that the healing ability of Dettol is even better than very good. It is very much near to excellent, but it is not exactly excellent. Then he will mark his response very, very close to the left extreme, that is excellent. The response would be marked somewhere near excellent. And this will give you an idea that respondent means that the healing ability of the soap Dettol antiseptic liquid is very, very close to excellent, though not excellent. So this in a way is an advantage also, but then it would create slightly different kind of problems. It will be difficult for the researcher to analyze the respondent's responses. Why? Because let's say the respondent has marked his response at a short distance from the left extreme, that is the excellent category. So at a very short distance from excellent he has marked his response. But does it mean very good, or does it mean good, or does it mean excellent? For that you will have to do what? You will have to actually take a scale and measure the distance of his response from the left extreme, and this will give you an idea whether it is very good, or it is just good, or it is more or less excellent. For example, let's say, I'll give another example. Suppose the respondent marks his response somewhere on the line between excellent and poor, and you need to know whether he feels that the Dettol antiseptic liquid has good healing ability, or does he feel that the healing ability is poor. For that you will have to measure the distance of his response from the two extremes. If the response has been marked closer to excellent, then the healing ability according to the respondent is good. On the other hand, if it is marked closer to poor, the healing ability of the respondent is not that good as far as the perception of the respondent is concerned. So the problem with these kind of scales is that they are very difficult to analyze. Let's talk of a slightly different kind of a scale, which is called the semantic differential scale. We have come across this word in business communication also, wherein we had a discussion on semantic barriers, and you know that semantic means language related. So what is the meaning of semantic differential scale? This example will clarify this. The question is almost phrased in a similar fashion, slightly different. But have a look at the response categories. On one extreme is excellent, on the other extreme it is poor. And excellent is the first response category, and the seventh response category is poor. In between we have got 5 more response categories, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Now this is a semantic differential scale because we are using dichotomous pair of words on the scale extremes. So dichotomous, now what is meaning of dichotomous pair of words? Dichotomous pair of words, in layman language you can say opposites. So dichotomous basically refers to the opposite or maybe word and its antonym. If you look at excellent and poor, they are opposites of each other. That is what we mean by dichotomous pair. This is fine. Dichotomous pairs, other dichotomous pairs can also be used: happy, sad, delighted and depressed, hot and cold. So there can be so many different dichotomous pair of words that can be used in semantic differential scale. These kind of scales would always have 7 categories. The 2 words which are at the extreme, which form the dichotomous pair, one of them is marked as 1 or the first response category, and the other one is marked as the 7th response category, and in between you've got 5 other response categories also. Let's say if a respondent marks somewhere between, he has to choose one of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. So if his response is 4, we can understand that 4 is exactly midway between 1 and 7, which means neither does he consider Dettol's antiseptic liquid's healing ability to be excellent, nor does he consider them to be poor, but he considers the healing ability to be somewhere exactly in the middle, right? So this is what you can make out of the responses marked by the respondent. And many times these kind of scales are used to assess the image of the company or the brand. And that is why in marketing research, semantic differential scales, they assume great importance. Let's talk of another type of scale, which is the Stapel scale, and have a look at the response categories which have been given here. Please understand that the question is almost the same. It may have been phrased in a slightly different manner, otherwise the question is almost the same. But the response categories are different. Here the response categories are very, very different from the earlier ones that we have discussed. The response categories, basically there are 10 of them: -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, and then we have got +1, +2 and so on and so forth till +5. So basically there are 10 response categories. One attribute of Stapel scale is unipolar rating scale. Now you have a look at this particular scale and you compare it with the semantic differential scale that we discussed a little while ago. In semantic differential scale, we have got 2 different adjectives: excellent and poor, at the 2 extremes. Or like I said, hot and cold can be another pair of dichotomous words. Delighted and depressed can be another pair. But the point is that in semantic differential scales, you have basically got 2 poles. So it is basically bipolar. Bi means 2. In this particular example, there are 2 poles. The first pole is excellent and the other one is poor. But that is not the case with the Stapel scale. Here we have got just 1 adjective, and that is why these kind of scales are called unipolar rating scales. Have a look at this one adjective. Healing ability. Healing ability is just one adjective which has been used in this particular scale. Basically, it is a unipolar scale. Now, what is the advantage of this kind of a scale? but you also need to bear in mind that there is no neutral category in a Stapel scale. So basically, if you look at the response categories, you have got 10 different response categories, and healing ability has been written so that the respondent understands as to what is the basis on which he will have to mark his responses. So here he understands that he will have to mark his responses according to what he thinks about the healing ability of Dettol antiseptic liquid. So there is no zero, no neutral category. And the most important advantage of Stapel scale is that it tells you about the direction and intensity of attitude. Now what do we mean by the direction of attitude? All these numbers which appear to the left of healing ability, they're all negative numbers, -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. Perhaps they are actually denoting a negative or an unfavorable attitude towards a particular brand or a product or some idea. On the other hand, towards right, you see that there are +1, +2. This way there are 5 positive numbers. So basically they are denoting positive attitude or a favorable attitude of the respondent towards the Dettol antiseptic liquid's healing capacity. So this is what is meant by the direction of attitude. But then we also can understand the intensity of attitude. Intensity of attitude would mean how intense or how strongly entrenched is the attitude. For example, +4 is always going to be more intense than +3, and +3 is going to be more intense than +1. Likewise, -5 here is going to be more intense than -3, and -3 is going to be more intense than -1. So this way we can also find out the intensity of the attitude. How intense is the attitude? So if there are two respondents, one respondent tells me that according to him the healing ability is, let's say, -2, and the other one tells me that according to him the healing ability is +4. The former, who said according to him the healing ability is -2, he has a negative attitude, but his negative attitude is relatively weaker. Had it been stronger, had it been more intense, he would probably have marked -4, -5. On the other hand, the latter respondent who says that according to him the healing ability is +4, he has got a very intense attitude. Had he marked +1, it would have been a relatively weaker attitude, though still in the same direction or in the positive or the favorable direction. So naturally, can you answer one of my questions? If, let's say, you belong to Dettol, you are working with Dettol, or let us say you are working with Reckitt and Benckiser, who is the marketer of this particular brand, when would you be happy? If the respondent tells you that the healing ability, if his response is +2, or if his response is -1. Yes, you would be happy if his response is +2, because that shows that a favorable attitude, though not a very strong, weaker but not very strong, but still a positive attitude towards your product. Another type of scale is called the Likert scale, and this is an example. And please keep in your mind that the response categories would always be like this: strongly agree, agree, undecided, disagree, and strongly disagree. In place of undecided, many places you might see neither agree nor disagree, but otherwise in all the questions which use the Likert scale, you would get the same response categories, same 5 response categories would be there. Though yes, they can be stated in the opposite fashion, reverse fashion also. For example, you can start with strongly disagree, then you move on to disagree, and then undecided, then agree, and then strongly agree. That is perfectly possible. But the categories would show agreement or disagreement only. See, this has been mentioned here also. The respondent has to specify the level of agreement or disagreement with the statement. The statement has been given there: Dettol antiseptic liquid heals well. And this statement basically is unipolar. it is not talking about two different poles, it is talking about just one pole, and that one particular pole, that particular aspect is that the Dettol antiseptic liquid actually heals well. So here we do not have two different poles, it's not bipolar, it is unipolar in this sense. Now don't think that we only have to mention the statement in affirmative, that is in positive sense. Dettol antiseptic liquid heals well. We can always phrase it in the negative also. What do we mean by negative? Let us understand. This was an affirmative sentence, Dettol antiseptic liquid heals well, but then there could be a negative sentence which would say that Dettol antiseptic liquid does not heal well. Now this would be a negative statement. So you can always put down the statement in negative also. It's not necessary that you always use the affirmative form, the positive form. You can always put it in negative. And we have seen that you can always reverse the sequence of the response categories by starting with strongly disagree and ending with strongly agree. So that is perfectly fine. Now let us talk about one more type of scale, which is called the purchase intention scale, and it is self-explanatory. Basically here, using this particular scale, we are trying to do what? We are basically trying to assess whether a respondent intends to purchase a particular product or a particular brand in near future. And this is what has been shown here. The example says, how likely are you to buy Dettol antiseptic liquid in the coming month? So definitely buy, probably not buy, and definitely not buy. There can be a fifth response category also between 2 and 3, where we can specify undecided as a option. So then there will be 3 response categories: definitely buy, probably buy, undecided, probably not buy, and definitely not buy. Now the application of this particular scale is where you have to forecast the demand. So whenever you have to forecast the demand, you can always go for purchase intention scales, because basically this scale is helping you find out whether a particular respondent is planning to buy a particular product or not in near future. And once you conduct this survey, you will get a good idea whether a large number of customers are planning to buy your product in the near future, which means that you can forecast your demand in the market. So that is why it is being used for demand forecasting. Let us talk about the rank order scale. You know what ranks are, what orders are. So here what happens, have a look. This is the question. Rate the following soaps on the basis of their healing ability. 1 is for the highest and 5 for the lowest ratings. So what would the respondent be doing? Respondent will look at all the 5 choices, and if he feels that, let's say, Johnson & Johnson has the best healing capability, has the highest healing ability among the 5 options that have been given here, then he will mark 1 in front of Johnson & Johnson. If he feels that Savlon has the poorest healing ability, then in front of Savlon he will have to mark 5. This is understood. This way he will have to specify his perceived order of products on the attribute of their healing ability. So according to the respondent, which product ranks the best as far as healing ability is concerned, and which product ranks the lowest as far as healing ability is concerned. So this is what we obtain from the rank order scale. Again, don't have this confusion in your mind that you always have to start with 1 for the highest and 5 for the lowest ratings. You can always use the opposite sequence also, which means you can always ask 1 for the lowest ratings and 5 for the highest ratings. So that is something that you can do on your own. Rank order scales are also used for demand forecasting, because it has also been seen that generally the company or the brand which is perceived to be the best by customers is more likely to be bought by them also, and that is why it is more likely to be the market leader.